They won't always tell you why they turned cold. Sometimes it happens in silence. One day, your presence warms a room. The next, your footsteps echo in it. Someone who once smiled now avoids your gaze. It's subtle at first. A short reply, a delayed response, a sudden quiet at your arrival. And before you can process it, something has shifted. You ask yourself, but what if the hatred isn't about you? What if what changed wasn't your worth, but their reflection in your light? Every human carries a silent battlefield within them, and sometimes you walk right into someone else's war, mistaking it for your own. This is where philosophy begins, not with answers, but with the courage to stand in the middle of that silence and truly see, what did I do wrong? It begins with a glance that lingers too briefly, a smile that never quite reaches the eyes, a response that arrives hours later when it once came in minutes. You notice it first as a subtle shift in the atmosphere, like the air pressure dropping before a storm you cannot yet see. Yesterday, they laughed at your jokes. Today, they check their phone when you speak. Yesterday, they sought your opinion. Today, they turn to others as if you've become invisible. The change is so gradual, so carefully orchestrated, that you almost convince yourself you're imagining it. But the body knows what the mind denies. Something fundamental has shifted, and you are standing in the aftermath of a decision you were never consulted about. This is the silent shift, the moment when someone's perception of you crystallizes into something colder, something distant. It happens without announcement, without explanation, without the courtesy of a conversation. One day you are welcome, the next you are tolerated. One day you belong, the next you are an outsider looking in at a warmth that no longer includes you. The ancient Stoics understood something profound about human experience. Events themselves are neutral. It is our perception, our interpretation, our attachment to how things should be that creates our suffering. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. But when someone's affection evaporates like morning mist, when their warmth turns to indifference, the mind struggles to apply such wisdom. We are wired to seek patterns, to find meaning in the shifts around us. When someone who once valued our presence begins to treat us as if we are merely taking up space, every instinct screams that we must have done something wrong. The mind becomes a detective, analyzing every recent interaction, every word spoken, every gesture made. We replay conversations like old films, searching for the moment everything went wrong. But what if the moment never existed? What if their shift toward you has nothing to do with anything you did or said? What if their coldness is not a response to your actions, but a reaction to their own internal landscape, a landscape you cannot see, cannot map, cannot navigate, because it was never yours to begin with? Consider Sarah, who noticed her longtime friend Emma growing distant after Sarah received a promotion at work. The conversations became shorter, the invitations stopped coming, and Emma's enthusiasm for Sarah's success felt forced, mechanical. Sarah spent weeks analyzing their friendship, wondering if she had become arrogant, if she had said something insensitive, if her happiness had somehow become offensive. The truth was simpler and more painful. Emma was wrestling with her own feelings of inadequacy, her own unfulfilled dreams, her own fear that she was being left behind. Sarah's success had become a mirror reflecting Emma's perceived failures, and rather than face that reflection, Emma chose distance. The silent shift often has little to do with who you are and everything to do with who they fear they are becoming. Your presence, your success, your contentment can become an unwitting spotlight on their own shadows. You become not a person, but a reminder of everything they feel they lack. This is where philosophy begins its quiet revolution in our understanding. The Stoics taught that we suffer not from what happens to us, but from our judgments about what happens to us. When someone grows cold toward you, the immediate judgment is personal. I have failed somehow. I am not enough. I have done something wrong. But what if the judgment itself is the problem? Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who understood suffering intimately, taught his students to distinguish between what is up to us and what is not up to us. Their opinion of you, their decision to withdraw, their choice to replace warmth with indifference, none of this is up to you. What is up to you is how you interpret their behavior, how you respond to their distance, and whether you choose to carry their coldness as evidence of your own worth. The silent shift is not a verdict on your value. It is information about their internal state, their capacity for connection, their ability to manage their own emotional weather. When someone turns away from you without explanation, they are not necessarily turning away from who you are. They may be turning away from who they see themselves becoming in your presence. Not every silence is your fault. Not every withdrawal is your responsibility. Not every coldness is your creation. Sometimes you are simply standing too close to someone else's storm, and they mistake your presence for the cause of their rain. The first step toward freedom is recognizing that their shift may have everything to do with them and nothing to do with you. The second step is learning to stand steady in that recognition, even when every instinct urges you to chase after explanations that may never come. In the silence of their withdrawal, you have a choice. You can make their distance about your inadequacy, or you can make it about their struggle. You can carry their coldness as proof of your failure, or you can observe it as evidence of their pain. The event remains the same, but your interpretation, and therefore your suffering, can change entirely. This is where the fracture begins to heal, not when they return to warmth, but when you stop needing them to. When someone's affection evaporates without explanation, something violent happens inside you. It is not the clean cut of rejection. That, at least, has the dignity of clarity. This is messier, more destabilizing. It is the slow erosion of certainty, the gradual realization that you have been reading the relationship wrong, that the warmth you felt was either never real or has died by causes unknown. The mind, faced with this ambiguity, becomes a storm system. Thoughts circle and collide like weather patterns, seeking equilibrium that never comes. You find yourself rehearsing conversations that will never happen, crafting explanations for behavior that defies explanation, building elaborate theories about what you might have done wrong based on evidence that may not exist. Sleep becomes elusive. You lie awake replaying every interaction from the past weeks, months, searching for the crack where everything began to fall apart. Did you talk too much at dinner? Were you too enthusiastic about your own news? Did your joke cross a line you didn't know existed? The mind becomes both prosecutor and defendant, building cases against yourself with the fierce dedication of someone who believes that understanding equals control. This is the tyranny of closure, the desperate need to know why, to have reasons, to make sense of senseless behavior. We are meaning-making creatures, living in a world that often refuses to provide meaning. We would rather blame ourselves than accept that some human behavior exists beyond the reach of our understanding. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about the human condition as fundamentally absurd, the collision between our deep need for meaning and the universe's indifference to providing it. When someone turns cold without explanation, we face this absurdity directly. We want reasons that may not exist. We want logic from behavior that may be entirely emotional. We want answers from people who may not even understand their own questions. The inner storm intensifies because we are fighting two battles simultaneously: the external battle to understand their behavior and the internal battle to maintain our sense of self-worth in the face of their rejection. These battles feed each other, creating a cycle of rumination that can last weeks, months, sometimes years. Consider the case of David, whose business partner of 5 years suddenly began excluding him from meetings, responding to his emails with cold professionalism and avoiding the easy camaraderie they had always shared. David spent months analyzing every business decision they had made together, every conversation they had shared, every moment where their partnership might have fractured. He lost sleep, lost weight, lost the joy he had once found in his work. The truth, when it finally emerged, had nothing to do with their business or their friendship. David's partner had been diagnosed with a serious illness and was too proud, too afraid, too overwhelmed to share the news. His coldness was not rejection. It was the desperate attempt of someone drowning to push away even those who might save him, rather than be seen as vulnerable. But David could not have known this, and even knowing it now, he cannot recover the months he spent in the storm of self-doubt, the weeks he spent questioning his own worth, the countless hours he spent trying to solve a puzzle that was never his to solve. This is the cruelty of the inner storm. It convinces us that our suffering is productive, that our rumination is bringing us closer to understanding. We mistake the intensity of our thinking for the quality of our insights. We believe that if we just analyze deeply enough, replay thoroughly enough, worry completely enough, we will crack the code of their behavior and find our way back to peace. But the storm is not a path to understanding. It is a prison built from our own thoughts. Each rumination is another bar, each replay another lock. We become captives of our own need to know, our own inability to accept mystery, our own refusal to believe that their behavior might have nothing to do with us. The existentialists understood that we are condemned to be free, that we have no choice but to make choices, even when we lack complete information. When someone grows cold without explanation, we face a fundamental choice. We can choose to make their behavior about our inadequacy, or we can choose to accept that some human mysteries will remain unsolved. The storm rages because we refuse to accept this freedom, this responsibility to choose our interpretation without perfect knowledge. We want their behavior to tell us who we are, rather than deciding for ourselves. We want their coldness to define our worth, rather than defining it from within. Epictetus taught that it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. The inner storm is our reaction, not to what they did, but to our refusal to accept what we cannot control. We storm because we cannot force them to explain. We rage because we cannot make them care. We suffer because we cannot control their choices, their feelings, their mysterious shifts from warmth to ice. The storm will pass, but only when we stop feeding it with our need to know, our need to fix, our need to turn their silence into our story. Sometimes the most profound act of self-care is learning to live with questions that have no answers, mysteries that resist solution, behavior that defies explanation. In the center of every storm is an eye of perfect stillness. The challenge is learning to find that center not when the storm passes, but while it still rages around you. We are the protagonists of our own stories, and protagonists believe everything happens for a reason related to them. When someone's behavior toward us shifts, our first instinct is to assume we are the cause. This is not narcissism. It is a fundamental feature of human consciousness, the cognitive bias that psychologists call personalization, the tendency to take responsibility for events beyond our control. You walk into a room and the conversation stops. Your mind immediately calculates, they were talking about me. A friend responds to your text hours later than usual. Your mind concludes, I said something wrong. A colleague who used to seek your input begins consulting others instead. Your mind declares, I have lost their respect. This bias served our ancestors well. In small tribal groups, social exclusion meant death. Being attuned to every shift in social temperature, every change in alliance, every sign of disapproval was literally a matter of survival. Our brains are still wired for those ancient dangers, still programmed to interpret social ambiguity as potential threat, still convinced that every frown is our fault, every silence our responsibility. But we no longer live in tribes where every relationship is crucial for survival. We live in complex social networks where people carry countless invisible pressures, secret struggles, unrelated anxieties that have nothing to do with us. Yet our ancient brain continues to process their behavior through the lens of immediate relevance to our survival. The Stoic philosophers understood this tendency and taught their students to question their initial interpretations of events. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly that others' actions might have causes completely unrelated to him. How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself. Consider two friends, Alex and Jordan, who both notice their mutual friend Sam becoming distant and moody. Alex immediately assumes he has done something to offend Sam and spends days replaying their recent interactions, searching for his mistake. Jordan, observing the same behavior, wonders if Sam is going through something difficult and reaches out to offer support. Same behavior, two interpretations. Alex makes Sam's mood about Alex's inadequacy. Jordan makes Sam's mood about Sam's struggle. Both cannot be right, but only one leads to unnecessary suffering. The personalization bias is strengthened by what psychologists call emotional reasoning. The tendency to assume that our emotional reactions are evidence of reality. If we feel rejected, we conclude we have been rejected. If we feel guilty, we conclude we have done something wrong. If we feel excluded, we conclude we are being deliberately excluded. But emotions, however valid as experiences, are not reliable reporters of external reality. They are responses to our interpretations of events, not direct measurements of what those events mean. When someone grows cold toward us, our hurt feelings tell us about our own vulnerabilities, not necessarily about their intentions. The Stoics taught a radical reframing of this tendency. Instead of asking, "What did I do wrong?" they taught their students to ask, "What story am I telling myself about this situation?" Instead of assuming personal causation, they practiced examining their own thought patterns, their own biases, their own tendency to make everything about themselves. This is not about becoming indifferent to others' behavior or pretending that relationships don't matter. It is about developing what psychologists call cognitive flexibility, the ability to consider multiple explanations for the same event, to hold our initial interpretations lightly, to remember that other people are complex beings with inner lives as rich and mysterious as our own. Sarah notices her co-worker Tom has been avoiding eye contact and giving short responses to her questions. Her first thought, "I must have done something to annoy him." But practicing cognitive flexibility, she generates alternative explanations. Tom might be dealing with a personal crisis. He might be overwhelmed with work. He might be feeling insecure about his own performance. He might be going through a difficult period in his marriage. He might be struggling with health issues he hasn't shared. None of these explanations definitively explain Tom's behavior, but they remind Sarah that she is not the only possible cause of his distance. This realization doesn't eliminate her concern, but it reduces her self-blame and opens space for compassion rather than self-recrimination. The personalization bias becomes particularly dangerous when it transforms into what psychologists call mind reading, the assumption that we know what others are thinking and feeling based on limited evidence. He's ignoring me because he thinks I'm annoying. She's being cold because she doesn't respect me anymore. They're laughing because they're making fun of me. But we cannot read minds. We can only observe behavior and create stories to explain it. The trouble comes when we forget that our stories are interpretations, not facts, when we mistake our assumptions for certainty, our fears for reality. Epictetus taught that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. Perhaps we also have this ratio so we can observe twice as much as we assume. When someone's behavior toward us changes, we can choose to listen more carefully, observe more openly, assume less readily. The goal is not to become naive or to ignore genuine social feedback. It is to develop the wisdom to distinguish between what we know and what we imagine, between what is happening and what we fear is happening, between their behavior and our interpretation of their behavior. Not every shift in someone's demeanor is about you. Not every change in their warmth is your responsibility. Not every distance they create is your fault. Learning to hold this truth, even when your ancient brain insists otherwise, is the beginning of freedom from the tyranny of personalization. Your worth is not determined by their mood. Your value is not measured by their response. Your adequacy is not defined by their behavior. This is perhaps the hardest lesson to learn and the most liberating to live. Hatred, when it appears suddenly and without apparent cause, is rarely about the person standing in front of them. It is about the person looking back at them from the mirror you have inadvertently become. You did not create their wound, but your presence has illuminated it, and for that illumination you have become the target of their pain. Every human being carries invisible wounds, places where life has cut them, where dreams have been deferred, where self-worth has been damaged. Most of the time, these wounds remain hidden, covered by the ordinary business of living, the daily distractions that keep us from looking too closely at our own reflections. But sometimes, someone appears in our life who, simply by being themselves, forces us to confront what we have been avoiding. You might remind them of someone who hurt them. You might represent something they feel they can never achieve. You might embody a quality they have lost or fear they never possessed. Your happiness might highlight their depression. Your success might emphasize their perceived failures. Your peace might disturb their chaos. Your very presence might force them to confront the distance between who they are and who they wish they could be. This is not your fault, but it becomes your burden when they cannot separate their internal struggle from your external presence. Unable to face their own reflection, they attack the mirror instead. Consider the phenomenon that psychologists call projection, the unconscious tendency to attribute our own feelings, thoughts, or motives to others. When someone suddenly begins treating you with hostility, they may be projecting their own self-hatred onto you. When they criticize you harshly, they may be voicing the harsh criticism they level at themselves. When they withdraw their affection, they may be protecting themselves from confronting their own capacity for self-destruction. Maria worked with a colleague, Jennifer, who had always been friendly and collaborative. But after Maria received recognition for a project they had worked on together, Jennifer's behavior changed dramatically. She became critical, dismissive, and eventually openly hostile. Maria was bewildered. The recognition had been for work they had both contributed to, and Maria had made sure to acknowledge Jennifer's contributions publicly. What Maria could not see was Jennifer's invisible wound, a deep-seated belief that she was not capable of achieving significant success, that recognition would always go to others, that she was destined to remain in the background. Maria's recognition, however fairly earned and graciously shared, had triggered Jennifer's core wound. Rather than face her own beliefs about her inadequacy, Jennifer chose to make Maria the enemy, to see her as someone who had stolen what Jennifer felt she deserved, but feared she could never earn. The French existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about bad faith, the human tendency to flee from the anxiety of authentic self-confrontation by adopting false beliefs about ourselves and others. When someone suddenly turns against you, they may be engaging in bad faith, choosing to see you as the source of their discomfort rather than examining the source within themselves. This is not a conscious choice. Most people are not aware they are projecting their wounds onto others. The mechanism operates below the level of conscious awareness, protecting them from insights they are not ready to face. Your presence has triggered something in them that they cannot or will not acknowledge, and attacking you feels safer than acknowledging their own pain. Sometimes the invisible wound is envy, not the simple desire for what you have, but the corrosive belief that your having it somehow diminishes them. They see your joy and feel their own sadness more acutely. They witness your confidence and become more aware of their own insecurity. They observe your peace and feel their own chaos more intensely. Rather than use your example as inspiration, they use it as evidence of their own inadequacy. Sometimes the wound is shame, the deep belief that they are fundamentally flawed, unworthy, or broken. Your presence, especially if you seem content or successful, becomes a reminder of everything they believe they are not. They begin to hate you not for anything you have done, but for who you appear to be in contrast to who they feel themselves to be. Sometimes the wound is unresolved grief, the loss of a relationship, a dream, a version of themselves they once hoped to become. You might remind them of what they have lost, or represent what they fear they will never find. Your existence becomes a painful reminder of their absence, your wholeness a mirror to their brokenness. The Stoics understood that we cannot control others' reactions to us, only our own responses to their reactions. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." When someone projects their wounds onto you, the temptation is to strike back, to defend yourself, to prove them wrong. But this only feeds the dynamic, confirming their unconscious belief that you are indeed a threat. The wiser response is to recognize their hatred as information about their internal state, not evidence of your character. Their inability to tolerate your presence tells you about their wound, not your worth. Their need to diminish you reveals their own sense of diminishment, not your actual inadequacy. This understanding does not make their behavior acceptable or mean you should tolerate abuse. It simply helps you locate the source of their hostility accurately. You are not the cause of their wound. You are merely standing too close to someone who is bleeding. Compassion does not require you to absorb their projections or accept their hostility. It requires you to see their behavior clearly, without taking on the false responsibility for their healing. Their wound is not yours to carry, their healing not yours to accomplish, their projection not yours to accept as truth about who you are. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone who is projecting their wound onto you is to step away, to refuse to play the role they have assigned you in their internal drama. This creates space for them to confront their own reflection without the distraction of blaming you for what they see. You cannot heal their invisible wound, but you can refuse to let it become yours. You cannot fix their projection, but you can decline to absorb it. You cannot change their need to make you the enemy, but you can choose not to become one. Their hatred is not your truth. Their wound is not your responsibility. Their projection is not your reality. This recognition is the beginning of freedom from the burden of carrying others' pain as evidence of your own inadequacy. There comes a moment in every difficult relationship when you must choose between understanding and self-preservation, between compassion and boundaries, between hoping they will change and accepting that you cannot change them. This is the moment of first separation, not necessarily physical distance, but the emotional and psychological space that allows you to observe their behavior without absorbing it as truth about yourself. The separation begins with a simple but profound recognition. Their opinion of you is not the same as the truth about you. Their behavior toward you reveals their internal state, not your worth. Their inability to appreciate your presence speaks to their capacity for appreciation, not your worthiness of appreciation. This recognition feels simultaneously liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it frees you from the exhausting work of trying to manage their perceptions, earn their approval, or fix their feelings about you. Terrifying because it forces you to locate your sense of worth somewhere other than in their reflection of you. The Stoics called this process the discipline of desire, learning to want only what is within our control and accepting what is not. You cannot control their opinion, their mood, their decision to withdraw their warmth. You can control your response to their withdrawal, your interpretation of their behavior, your decision about how much of their energy you will absorb. Epictetus taught his students to say, "This is not mine to carry," when faced with others' emotions, judgments, or projections. When someone treats you coldly, you can choose to carry their coldness as evidence of your inadequacy, or you can choose to observe it as evidence of their struggle and refuse to make it yours. This separation is not callous indifference. It is the cultivation of what psychologists call emotional differentiation, the ability to remain connected to others without losing yourself in their emotional weather. You can care about someone's struggle without making their struggle about you. You can feel compassion for their wound without accepting responsibility for healing it. Consider the metaphor of a ship in a storm. You can acknowledge the power of the storm, respect its danger, even feel moved by its intensity without believing that you caused it or that you must calm it. You can navigate through it without trying to stop it, survive it without thinking you deserved it. When someone suddenly begins treating you with hostility or indifference, you are encountering their storm. You did not create their weather, you cannot control their climate, and you are not responsible for their clearing skies. Your only choice is how you navigate through their tempest without losing your own sense of direction. The first separation requires you to distinguish between empathy and absorption. Empathy allows you to understand their struggle without taking it on as your own. Absorption makes you responsible for feelings that do not belong to you, moods you did not create, wounds you did not inflict. Sarah had been friends with Emma for 10 years when Emma began treating her with increasing coldness and criticism. Sarah's first impulse was to work harder at the friendship, to be more understanding, to try to figure out what she had done wrong. But the harder she tried, the more hostile Emma became. Finally, Sarah recognized that she was trying to solve a problem that was not hers to solve, heal a wound that was not hers to heal, manage emotions that were not hers to manage. The separation came when Sarah stopped asking, "What did I do wrong?" and started asking, "What is happening inside Emma that has nothing to do with me?" This shift in perspective created space between Emma's behavior and Sarah's sense of self-worth. Sarah could still care about Emma without making Emma's struggles about Sarah's adequacy. This separation does not mean abandoning all hope for the relationship or becoming cynically detached from others' experiences. It means learning to distinguish between what belongs to you and what belongs to them, between your responsibility and their responsibility, between your emotions and their emotions. The Stoics practiced this separation through what they called objective representation, describing events in neutral language stripped of emotional interpretation. Instead of "she hates me," you might say, "she is behaving in ways that feel rejecting." Instead of "I must have done something terrible," you might say, "something has changed in her emotional state." Instead of "I am not good enough," you might say, "she is unable to appreciate my presence right now." This linguistic discipline helps create the psychological space necessary for clear thinking. When you stop making their behavior about your character, you can begin to see their behavior more clearly, with less distortion from your own fears and assumptions. The separation also requires you to locate your sense of worth somewhere more stable than others' opinions. If your value depends on their approval, you will always be at the mercy of their moods, their wounds, their capacity for appreciation. But if your worth is based on something more fundamental, your inherent dignity as a human being, your efforts to live with integrity, your commitment to treating others with kindness, then their opinion becomes just one voice among many, not the definitive verdict on your adequacy. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." When someone turns cold toward you, you can choose to think, "I am not worthy of warmth." Or you can choose to think, "They are unable to offer warmth right now." The event remains the same, but your interpretation, and therefore your peace, can change entirely. The first separation is not the end of caring. It is the beginning of caring wisely. You can wish them well without needing them to wish you well. You can hope for their healing without taking responsibility for their wounds. You can maintain your compassion without sacrificing your peace. You were never the war they are fighting. You were just the mirror that showed them the battlefield. Now you can step away from that mirror and let them face their reflection without making their struggle about your worth. This is where freedom begins, not when they stop being cold, but when their coldness stops defining your temperature. Not when they return to warmth, but when you stop needing their warmth to feel warm yourself. The human mind is an architect of extraordinary ingenuity, capable of constructing elaborate buildings from the raw materials of perception, memory, and emotion. But sometimes, when the foundation of self-knowledge is unstable, the mind builds its structures in the wrong location, not within the landscape of the self, but on the territory of others. Projection is one of the mind's most sophisticated defense mechanisms, a psychological sleight of hand so subtle that even the person performing it remains unaware of the trick. When someone cannot tolerate a particular feeling, thought, or aspect of themselves, they unconsciously relocate it to someone else. They see in others what they cannot bear to see in themselves, feel toward others what they cannot bear to feel about themselves, and hate in others what they refuse to acknowledge within themselves. This is not conscious deception. The person engaging in projection genuinely experiences their projected feelings as originating from the other person. They are not lying when they say you make them angry. They truly feel angry in your presence. They are not pretending when they claim you are selfish. They genuinely perceive selfishness in your behavior. The projection has become their reality, as convincing as any optical illusion. Consider James, a middle manager who prided himself on his work ethic and dedication. When a new colleague, Michael, joined the team and quickly gained recognition for his innovative ideas, James found himself increasingly critical of Michael. He complained that Michael was showing off, that he was trying too hard to impress the boss, that he was making the rest of us look bad. To James, these criticisms felt entirely justified. He was simply observing Michael's obvious character flaws. But what James could not see was his own architecture of projection. The qualities he criticized in Michael, ambition, creativity, confidence, were qualities he had suppressed in himself years ago after being told by a previous boss that he was too eager and needed to know his place. Rather than face his own buried ambitions and the pain of having stifled them, James projected them onto Michael and attacked them there, where they felt safer to confront. The Stoic philosophers understood that our perceptions of others are often more revealing of our internal state than of external reality. Marcus Aurelius observed, "How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself." This was not mere self-absorption, but recognition that our judgments of others are filtered through the lens of our own unresolved conflicts. Epictetus taught that it's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things. When someone projects their internal conflicts onto you, they are not responding to who you actually are. They are responding to their judgment about what you represent, what you trigger in them, what uncomfortable truth about themselves your presence illuminates. The architecture of projection often follows predictable patterns. People tend to project their disowned strengths as well as their denied weaknesses. Someone who has suppressed their own creativity might see others as pretentious or attention-seeking. Someone who has denied their own vulnerability might perceive others as weak or needy. Someone who has rejected their own desires might view others as selfish or greedy. Lisa worked in a non-profit organization where she was known for her selflessness and dedication to helping others. When a new volunteer, Rachel, joined the team and spoke passionately about wanting to make a difference, Lisa found herself inexplicably irritated. She criticized Rachel as naive, self-righteous, and in it for the wrong reasons. What Lisa could not acknowledge was that Rachel's enthusiasm reminded her of her own idealism from years past, an idealism she had gradually suppressed as she became cynical about the possibility of real change. Rather than face her own lost hope, Lisa projected her cynicism onto Rachel and attacked the hope she saw there. The existentialist philosophers, particularly Jean-Paul Sartre, explored how our encounters with others force us to confront aspects of ourselves we might prefer to avoid. Sartre wrote about the look of the other, the way another person's gaze can suddenly make us aware of ourselves as an object of judgment, forcing us to see ourselves as we imagine others see us. This confrontation with our own reflection through another's eyes can be deeply uncomfortable, leading some to attack the mirror rather than examine what it reveals. When someone suddenly begins treating you with hostility, they may be experiencing what psychologists call the return of the repressed, the emergence of feelings, desires, or aspects of themselves they have worked hard to keep buried. Your presence, your behavior, your very existence might be calling forth something in them they are not prepared to face, and attacking you feels easier than facing themselves. The projection creates a kind of psychological relief. Instead of sitting with the discomfort of self-examination, they can focus their attention on your supposed flaws. Instead of dealing with their own unresolved emotions, they can manage yours. Instead of taking responsibility for their internal state, they can make you responsible for their external reactions. This is why projection is so resistant to rational discussion. When you try to defend yourself against projected accusations, you are essentially trying to talk someone out of their own unconscious self-perception. When you attempt to prove that you are not selfish, attention-seeking, or manipulative, you are fighting shadows cast by their own internal landscape. The Stoics would say that the projector's perception is not up to you. It belongs entirely to their internal architecture, their unresolved conflicts, their relationship with themselves. Your only choice is whether to accept their projection as truth about yourself or to recognize it as information about their internal state. Understanding projection does not require you to become a therapist to others or to take responsibility for their self-awareness. It simply helps you locate the source of their hostility accurately. When someone projects onto you, they are not seeing you clearly. They are seeing their own reflection in the mirror of your presence and responding to what they find there. The question is not whether you can stop them from projecting. You cannot control their psychological processes any more than you can control their dreams. The question is whether you will absorb their projections as truth about yourself or recognize them as artifacts of their own unfinished business with themselves. This recognition is the first step toward freedom from the tyranny of others' perceptions. When you understand that their hatred often has nothing to do with who you are and everything to do with who they fear they are, you can begin to separate their emotional architecture from your own foundation. You are not responsible for what they see when they look at you. You are only responsible for who you choose to be, regardless of their projections. This is where the mirror becomes clear, not when they stop projecting, but when you stop absorbing their projections as truth about your reflection. Every relationship carries invisible contracts, unspoken agreements about how each person should behave, what they should provide, what they owe the other. These contracts are written in the secret ink of assumption, signed without ceremony, and enforced with the stern judgment of disappointed expectations. When someone suddenly grows cold toward you, you may have unknowingly violated a contract you never knew existed. The architecture of expectation is built from past experiences, cultural conditioning, and unconscious patterns learned in childhood. We expect friends to always be available, partners to intuitively understand our needs, colleagues to appreciate our contributions in specific ways, family members to fulfill roles we have assigned them without their knowledge or consent. These expectations feel natural, reasonable, even obvious to us, but they are invisible to others until we react to their violation. Consider the friendship between Anna and Beth, which had flourished for 3 years until Beth received a prestigious job offer that required her to relocate. Anna found herself growing increasingly resentful as Beth spoke excitedly about her new opportunity began spending time with new friends in her destination city and seemed less available for their usual long phone conversations. Anna felt betrayed, abandoned, even angry, but she could not articulate why. The unspoken contract Anna had constructed ran something like this. True friends prioritize the friendship over personal opportunities. They remain emotionally available regardless of life changes. They should be sad about separation and resistant to replacement friendships. Beth, unaware of this contract, was simply navigating her transition with natural enthusiasm and practical preparation. Her violation of Anna's expectations felt to Anna like a fundamental character flaw, a revelation of Beth's true selfishness. But expectations are not agreements. They are projections of our own needs disguised as universal truths. When we expect someone to behave in a particular way and they fail to meet that expectation, we often interpret their behavior as a moral failing rather than a difference in values, priorities, or understanding. The Stoic philosophers identified expectation as a primary source of human suffering. Epictetus taught that it's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things. And expectations are judgments about how things should be. When we expect someone to respond to our kindness with gratitude, to reciprocate our level of investment, to prioritize our needs in the way we think they should, we set ourselves up for disappointment and set them up to be seen as inadequate. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about the futility of expecting others to conform to our internal models of how they should behave. How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, he observed, recognizing that our focus on others' conformity to our expectations is a source of unnecessary suffering. The weight of others' expectations often becomes clear only when we fail to meet them. David had been the go-to person in his friend group for emotional support, practical help, and social coordination. When he went through his own difficult period following a divorce and became less available to others, several friends began treating him with noticeable coldness. They had unconsciously cast him in the role of caretaker, and his temporary inability to fulfill that role felt like abandonment rather than understandable human limitation. These unspoken contracts often reflect what psychologists call attachment styles, the patterns of connection and expectation we develop in early relationships and carry forward into adult interactions. Someone with an anxious attachment style might have unconscious contracts that read, "If you care about me, you will always be available. You will prioritize my needs. You will provide constant reassurance." Someone with an avoidant attachment style might have contracts that read, "If you truly respect me, you will not demand too much emotional intimacy. You will not require me to express feelings I am not comfortable sharing." Neither person may be aware of these contracts, but both will feel violated when the other person's natural behavior contradicts their unconscious expectations. The anxiously attached person may interpret their partner's need for space as rejection. The avoidantly attached person may interpret their partner's desire for closeness as intrusion. The existentialist philosophers explored how these unconscious contracts limit human freedom. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about bad faith, the tendency to treat ourselves and others as objects with fixed natures rather than free beings capable of choice and change. When we expect someone to always be available, always supportive, always grateful, we are treating them as objects designed to fulfill our needs rather than free beings with their own complex lives and limitations. Sometimes the contracts we impose on others are rooted in entitlement. the belief that our kindness, friendship, or love obligates others to respond in specific ways. "After everything I've done for you" becomes the foundation for resentment when others fail to reciprocate according to our internal accounting system. But relationships are not business transactions. Kindness given with the expectation of specific returns is not truly kindness. It is investment seeking guaranteed profit. Sarah had been a generous friend to many people, offering emotional support, practical help, and consistent availability. When she went through a period of personal crisis and reached out for help, several friends were noticeably absent. Sarah felt deeply betrayed, as if her years of giving had been wasted on people who didn't truly care about her. But the friends she was judging had never explicitly agreed to reciprocate her level of support. They had simply accepted her generosity without realizing it came with invisible strings attached. The weight of expectations becomes particularly crushing when it is combined with the human tendency to mind read, to assume we know what others are thinking and feeling based on limited evidence. "She should know how important this is to me," assumes that others have access to our internal landscape. "He should understand what I need without me having to ask," assumes that others can read our minds and should adjust their behavior accordingly. But others cannot read our minds, cannot know our unspoken needs, cannot conform to contracts they never signed. The Stoics taught the importance of distinguishing between what is up to us and what is not up to us. Others' behavior, others' priorities, others' responses to our kindness, none of this is up to us. What is up to us is our own behavior, our own choices about how to respond when others fail to meet our expectations. The path toward freedom from the weight of expectations begins with making the invisible contracts visible. What do you expect from friends, partners, colleagues, family members? What unspoken agreements have you created about how others should behave? What strings are attached to your kindness, your support, your love? Once these expectations are conscious, you can choose whether to maintain them or release them. You can choose to communicate your needs directly rather than expecting others to intuit them. You can choose to give without keeping score, to love without requiring specific returns, to support others without demanding reciprocal support. This does not mean becoming a doormat or accepting mistreatment. It means distinguishing between reasonable boundaries and unreasonable expectations, between clear communication and mind reading, between mutual respect and obligated performance. When someone grows cold toward you after failing to meet your unconscious expectations, the question is not whether they should have met those expectations. The question is whether those expectations were fair, communicated, or necessary for your own well-being. Freedom comes not when others meet all your expectations, but when you release your attachment to how others should behave and focus instead on how you choose to behave regardless of their responses. Envy is the most carefully disguised of human emotions, dressed in the respectable clothing of moral indignation, aesthetic criticism, or principled disagreement. It rarely announces itself honestly, preferring to masquerade as something more acceptable to the conscious mind. When someone suddenly begins treating you with hostility, you may be witnessing envy in one of its many costumes, performing its elaborate dance of concealment. Unlike jealousy, which fears losing something we possess, envy resents others for having something we lack. But this resentment is so painful to acknowledge that the mind transforms it into something more palatable. Instead of admitting, "I want what they have," the envious person finds reasons why the other person doesn't deserve what they have, why their success is somehow fraudulent, why their happiness is misguided, why their advantages are unfair. The sophisticated machinery of envy can transform any positive quality into a negative one. Your confidence becomes arrogance, your success becomes luck, your happiness becomes naivety, your peace becomes complacency, your kindness becomes manipulation. The envious mind becomes a master alchemist, transmuting gold into lead, virtue into vice, blessing into burden. Consider the case of two writers, Elena and Marcus, who had been friends since college. When Elena's novel was accepted for publication after years of rejections, Marcus's response was noticeably lukewarm. Over the following months, he began making subtle criticisms of her work, questioning whether her success was really earned, suggesting that the publishing industry was dumbed down, and implying that her happiness about the achievement was somehow shallow or misplaced. Marcus was not conscious of his envy. In his mind, he was simply offering honest literary criticism, pointing out the decline of publishing standards and questioning the value systems that prioritized commercial success over artistic integrity. The elaborate intellectual framework he constructed around his resentment made it feel legitimate, even noble. He was not envious. He was discerning. He was not bitter. He was realistic. But beneath the sophisticated justifications, Marcus was struggling with a simple and painful truth. Eleanor had achieved something he desperately wanted, but had been unable to attain. Her success forced him to confront his own perceived failures, his own unfulfilled dreams, his own fear that he might never achieve the recognition he craved. Rather than face these uncomfortable truths about himself, he chose to diminish her achievement and question her worthiness. The ancient philosophers understood envy as a form of self-inflicted suffering. Aristotle described it as pain at the good fortune of others, while the Stoics saw it as a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of good and evil. Marcus Aurelius observed that envy reveals a person's inability to find contentment within themselves, their dependence on comparison for self-worth, their belief that life is a zero-sum game where another's gain necessarily represents their loss. Envy operates on several false premises that make it particularly destructive. The first is the scarcity myth, the belief that there is only so much success, happiness, or good fortune available in the world, and another person's portion diminishes what remains for everyone else. The envious person sees your promotion and thinks their chances for advancement have decreased. They see your happiness and feel their own sadness more acutely. They witness your peace and become more aware of their own chaos. The second premise is the comparison trap, the belief that our worth is determined relative to others rather than absolute terms. When someone bases their self-esteem on being better than others, anyone who surpasses them in any area becomes a threat to their entire sense of identity. Your success doesn't just represent achievement, it represents their failure. Your contentment doesn't just represent peace, it represents their inadequacy. The third premise is the desert fallacy, the belief that we can accurately judge who deserves what in life. The envious person becomes convinced that they are more deserving of your success than you are, that they have worked harder, suffered more, or possess superior qualities that should have been rewarded instead. This moral framework transforms their resentment into righteous indignation, making their envy feel justified rather than petty. Jennifer worked in a non-profit organization where she had volunteered for years before accepting a paid position. When a recent graduate, Kevin, was hired for a higher-level position with better pay, Jennifer's reaction was swift and cutting. She questioned his qualifications, criticized his lack of real-world experience, and suggested that his hiring represented everything wrong with the organization's priorities. Jennifer's envy was wrapped in legitimate concerns about fairness and experience, making it difficult for her to recognize the emotion beneath her criticism. She genuinely believed that her years of volunteer service should have been rewarded, that her dedication should have been valued more highly than Kevin's credentials. But her inability to celebrate Kevin's success, her need to diminish his qualifications, and her transformation of her disappointment into moral judgment revealed the envious foundation beneath her rational objections. The existentialist philosophers explored how envy represents a fundamental denial of human freedom. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that envy emerges when we encounter others who have made choices or achieved outcomes that remind us of our own unused freedom, our own unrealized possibilities. Instead of taking responsibility for our own choices and their consequences, we resent others for making different choices that led to different outcomes. Simone de Beauvoir wrote about how envy can become a way of avoiding the anxiety of authentic choice. When we see someone else's success, we can either use it as inspiration for our own growth or as an excuse for our own stagnation. Envy chooses stagnation, preferring to tear down others rather than build up ourselves, to explain away their achievements rather than examine our own limitations. The Stoic response to encountering others' envy is not to diminish yourself to make them comfortable, but to recognize their envy as information about their internal state rather than evidence of your inadequacy. Epictetus taught that others' opinions, including their envious opinions, are not up to you and therefore not worthy of your emotional energy. When someone treats your success with hostility, your happiness with criticism, or your peace with suspicion, they may be revealing their own relationship with these qualities. Their inability to celebrate your good fortune tells you about their capacity for joy, not about your worthiness of celebration. Their need to diminish your achievements tells you about their relationship with success, not about the validity of your accomplishments. Marcus Aurelius counseled his readers to respond to envy with compassion rather than defensiveness. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. When someone's envy attacks your character, your motivations, or your worthiness, the temptation is to defend yourself, to prove them wrong, to fight fire with fire. But this only feeds the dynamic, confirming their unconscious belief that life is indeed a competition where one person's victory requires another's defeat. The wiser response is to recognize their envy as a form of suffering, their suffering, not yours. They are in pain, comparing their inside to your outside, their struggles to your successes, their chaos to your peace. This understanding does not require you to minimize your achievements or hide your happiness to protect their feelings, but it can help you respond with compassion rather than contempt. Envy in disguise is particularly insidious because it masquerades as legitimate criticism, moral concern, or aesthetic judgment. Learning to recognize it requires developing what the Stoics called clear thinking, the ability to see through surface justifications to underlying motivations, to distinguish between genuine feedback and envious attack, between constructive criticism and destructive comparison. Your success, your happiness, your peace are not crimes against those who lack them. Your achievements are not stolen from others who might have achieved them instead. Your contentment is not a judgment against those who struggle to find it. You have the right to flourish without apologizing to those who resent your flourishing. When envy comes disguised as concern, wisdom, or principle, your task is not to unmask it for the envious person. They are not ready to see it clearly. Your task is to see it clearly yourself, so you can respond to their envy without absorbing it as truth about your worth, your character, or your right to live fully. There are people who will hate you not for what you have done, but for what you represent. Your calm will disturb their chaos. Your integrity will highlight their compromises. Your growth will emphasize their stagnation. Your very existence becomes a mirror they cannot bear to look into, reflecting back to them truths about themselves they are not ready to face. This is perhaps the most bewildering form of hostility to receive because it is so completely disconnected from your actions. You have not wronged them, competed with them, or taken anything from them. You have simply existed in a way that forces them to confront the distance between who they are and who they could be, between the choices they have made and the choices they could have made differently. The fear of reflection is rooted in what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the discomfort we feel when our actions contradict our values, when our behavior conflicts with our self-image, when our choices produce outcomes we cannot reconcile with our beliefs about ourselves. Rather than resolve this dissonance by changing either their behavior or their self-concept, some people choose a third option: attacking the mirror that shows them their contradictions. Consider Maria, who had gradually become cynical about her marriage, settling into patterns of criticism, contempt, and emotional distance from her husband. When her friend Laura spoke enthusiastically about her own marriage, expressing gratitude for her partner and describing their relationship with genuine warmth, Maria found herself inexplicably irritated. She began making subtle criticisms of Laura's naivety, questioning whether her happiness was realistic, and suggesting that her positive attitude toward marriage was somehow immature or misguided. Maria was not conscious of why Laura's contentment bothered her so deeply. In her mind, she was simply offering realistic perspective to a friend who was being overly romantic about the institution of marriage. But Laura's genuine happiness forced Maria to confront an uncomfortable truth. The problems in her own marriage were not inevitable features of all marriages, but specific consequences of choices she and her husband had made. Laura's example proved that different choices could lead to different outcomes, a truth Maria found too threatening to acknowledge. The existentialist philosophers explored this phenomenon through their analysis of bad faith, the human tendency to deny our own freedom and responsibility by convincing ourselves that our circumstances are inevitable, that our choices are constrained, that our patterns of behavior are fixed aspects of our nature, rather than ongoing decisions we make each day. When someone encounters another person who has made different choices and achieved different outcomes, it can trigger a crisis of bad faith. The other person's existence becomes proof that change is possible, that circumstances can be different, that the patterns we have accepted as inevitable are actually choices we have been making repeatedly. This revelation can be liberating or terrifying, depending on our readiness to take responsibility for our own freedom. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about the anxiety that accompanies authentic self-confrontation. Man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. When someone's life reflects different possibilities, it reminds us that we too are condemned to be free, that our current circumstances are not inevitable facts, but consequences of choices, and that different choices remain possible. David worked in a corporate environment where cynicism was the dominant culture. Employees regularly complained about management, mocked the company's stated values, and treated their work as something to be endured rather than engaged with. When a new employee, Sarah, joined the team with genuine enthusiasm for the work and respect for the organization's mission, The reaction was swift and harsh. Colleagues questioned her sincerity, mocked her optimism, and worked to undermine her positive attitude. Sarah's enthusiasm forced her co-workers to confront an uncomfortable possibility. Maybe their cynicism was a choice rather than an inevitable response to their work environment. Maybe their negativity was more about their own attitudes than about objective workplace conditions. Maybe their misery was self-created rather than imposed from above. Rather than examine these possibilities, they chose to attack the mirror, to convince themselves and Sarah that her positivity was naive, unrealistic, or somehow fraudulent. The Stoic philosophers understood that our responses to others often reveal more about our internal state than about their external behavior. Marcus Aurelius observed that the universe is change, our life is what our thoughts make it. When someone's way of being in the world triggers our hostility, it may be because their thoughts, and therefore their life, demonstrate possibilities we have not been willing to explore. This dynamic becomes particularly intense when the reflection touches core areas of identity or values. Someone who has compromised their integrity repeatedly may feel intensely uncomfortable around someone who maintains strong ethical standards. Someone who has given up on their dreams may resent those who continue pursuing theirs. Someone who has become bitter about love may feel threatened by those who remain open to connection. The fear of reflection often manifests as moral criticism of the very qualities the person fears they lack. The person who has become dishonest attacks others as fake. The person who has become selfish criticizes others as self-righteous. The person who has become closed-hearted condemns others as naive or unrealistic. The criticism is not really about the other person. It is about the internal conflict between who they are and who they once hoped to be. Lisa had been struggling with depression for several years, gradually withdrawing from activities she once enjoyed and relationships she once valued. When her friend Amanda maintained her engagement with life, continuing to pursue her interests, maintain her friendships, and approach challenges with resilience, Lisa found herself increasingly critical of Amanda's superficial happiness and naive optimism. Lisa's criticism was her mind's way of protecting her from facing a painful possibility, that her withdrawal from life was not an inevitable consequence of her depression, but a series of choices that could potentially be made differently. Amanda's continued engagement with life was proof that different responses to difficulty were possible, a truth Lisa found too threatening to acknowledge directly. The Stoic response to being someone's unwanted mirror is not to dim your light to make them comfortable, but to recognize that their discomfort is information about their relationship with themselves, not evidence of anything wrong with your way of being in the world. Epictetus taught that it's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things. When someone judges your peace as complacency, your integrity as naivety, or your growth as showing off, they are revealing their own judgments about these qualities, not objective truths about your character. Marcus Aurelius counseled himself to let the mirror stay clean, rather than becoming distorted by others' need to see their own flaws reflected in it. When someone cannot tolerate your way of being in the world, the temptation is to change yourself to reduce their discomfort, to become smaller so they feel larger, to compromise your values so they feel less confronted by theirs. But this diminishment serves no one. It does not help them grow or heal. It simply enables their avoidance of self-confrontation. And it certainly does not serve your own development or integrity. The kindest thing you can do for someone who fears their reflection in you is to remain authentically yourself, letting them choose whether to use your example as inspiration for change or as justification for remaining the same. You are not responsible for others' readiness to face themselves. You are not obligated to become smaller so others feel larger. You are not required to dim your light so others feel less confronted by the darkness they have accepted in their own lives. When someone hates you for what you represent rather than what you have done, remember that you are not the source of their discomfort. You are simply the occasion for it. Their fear of reflection is about their relationship with themselves, not about your worthiness to exist as you are. Let the mirror stay clean. Let your light shine steadily. Let your integrity remain intact. Those who are ready to grow will use your example as inspiration. Those who are not ready will use it as irritation. Neither response is your responsibility to manage or change. The final and most profound liberation comes when you learn to separate your sense of self from others' perceptions of you. This is what the Stoics called disidentification. The practice of recognizing that you are not what others think about you, feel about you, or project onto you. You are not the sum of their opinions, the target of their emotions, or the canvas for their psychological projections. This separation is not achieved through indifference or emotional numbing, but through a clear understanding of where you end and others begin, what belongs to your identity and what belongs to their experience, what is your responsibility and what is theirs. It is the cultivation of what philosophers call ontological independence, the recognition that your existence and worth are not dependent on external validation or approval. Most of us learn early to measure ourselves through others' eyes, to gauge our worth by their responses, to define our identity through their reflections. We become walking mirrors, constantly adjusting our shape to please the observer, constantly seeking confirmation that we are acceptable, worthy, good enough. But this external orientation makes us prisoners of others' moods, victims of their psychological weather, hostages to their capacity for appreciation. The practice of disidentification begins with a fundamental recognition. Others' emotions about you are not facts about you. Their anger does not make you wrong. Their disapproval does not make you inadequate. Their rejection does not make you unworthy. Their inability to appreciate you does not make you unappreciable. Their psychological projections do not become your psychological reality. Consider the metaphor of a movie screen. The screen remains white and unchanged whether the film projected upon it is a comedy or tragedy, a romance or horror story. The images that appear on the screen tell you about the film, not about the screen itself. Similarly, others' emotional reactions to you tell you about their internal film reel, their past experiences, their current struggles, their unconscious patterns, not about your essential nature. Sarah worked with a colleague, Robert, who seemed to take an instant dislike to her despite her professional competence and collegial approach. Robert was critical of her ideas, dismissive of her contributions, and openly hostile in meetings. Sarah's first impulse was to change her behavior, work harder to gain his approval, and question whether she was somehow inadequate as a professional. But as Sarah practiced disidentification, she began to see Robert's hostility as information about Robert rather than evidence about herself. She learned that Robert had recently been passed over for a promotion that went to someone with Sarah's background and expertise. His hostility toward her was not a response to her inadequacy, but a projection of his own disappointment and insecurity. Once Sarah stopped taking his reactions personally, she could respond to his behavior without absorbing his emotions as truth about her own worth. The Stoic philosophers developed specific practices for cultivating this independence from external opinion. Marcus Aurelius regularly reminded himself that others' judgments were not up to him, and therefore not worthy of his emotional investment. Epictetus taught his students to say, "That is not mine to carry," when faced with others' emotions, expectations, or projections. This does not mean becoming callous or indifferent to others' experiences. It means learning to distinguish between empathy and absorption, between caring about others and making their emotions about you, between being responsive to feedback and being dependent on approval. The practice involves several key recognitions. Recognition. 1. Others' capacity for appreciation reflects their internal state, not your worth. Someone's inability to see your value tells you about their vision, not about your visibility. Their failure to appreciate your kindness tells you about their relationship with kindness, not about the quality of your heart. Their rejection of your friendship tells you about their capacity for connection, not about your worthiness of friendship. Recognition. 2. Others' emotional reactions belong to their psychological ecosystem, not yours. When someone feels angry in your presence, that anger exists in their emotional landscape, not yours. You can acknowledge its existence without accepting ownership of it. You can respond to it without absorbing it as evidence of your own inadequacy. Recognition. 3. Others' projections reveal their shadows, not your character. When someone accuses you of being selfish, manipulative, or attention-seeking, they may be projecting qualities they cannot acknowledge in themselves. Their accusations tell you about their internal conflicts, not about your actual character traits. The existentialist philosophers explored how this independence is actually an expression of human freedom. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that existence precedes essence, that we exist first and create our identity through our choices rather than being born with fixed natures determined by others' perceptions. When you practice disidentification, you are exercising your fundamental freedom to define yourself rather than being defined by others. This freedom is both liberating and terrifying. It means you cannot blame others for your sense of inadequacy. If you feel unworthy, it is because you have chosen to accept others' judgments as truth rather than opinion. But it also means you have the power to choose differently, to locate your worth somewhere more stable than others' fluctuating moods and projections. Tom struggled with his father's chronic disappointment and criticism. No matter what Tom achieved, academic success, career advancement, personal growth, his father remained disapproving and distant. For years, Tom interpreted his father's reaction as evidence of his own inadequacy, working harder and harder to earn approval that never came. Through practicing disidentification, Tom began to see his father's disappointment as information about his father's internal state rather than evidence about Tom's worth. He learned that his father had been a frustrated artist who gave up his dreams to provide for his family, and Tom's creative success triggered his father's unresolved grief about his own abandoned aspirations. Once Tom stopped making his father's disappointment about his own inadequacy, he could maintain compassion for his father while protecting his own sense of worth. The practice of disidentification does not happen overnight. It requires consistent effort to catch yourself absorbing others' emotions, to question your automatic interpretations of their behavior, to remember that their reactions tell you about them rather than you. It requires developing what psychologists call emotional regulation, the ability to remain steady in your own emotional center regardless of the emotional weather around you. The ultimate goal is not to become immune to others' feedback or indifferent to their experiences, but to develop what the Stoics called equanimity, the ability to remain balanced and centered regardless of external circumstances. You can care about others without making their emotions about you. You can be responsive to legitimate feedback without being dependent on constant approval. You can maintain compassion for others' struggles without accepting responsibility for their projections. When someone suddenly begins treating you with hostility, practicing disidentification allows you to ask better questions. What might be happening in their internal world that has nothing to do with me? Rather than, what did I do wrong? How can I respond with wisdom and integrity? Rather than, how can I get them to like me again? What does this teach me about human psychology? Rather than, what does this say about my adequacy? This shift in questioning is the beginning of true freedom. Freedom from the tyranny of others' opinions. Freedom from the prison of external validation. Freedom from the endless cycle of seeking approval from those who may not be capable of giving it. You are not what they think about you. You are not what they feel about you. You are not what they project onto you. You are the conscious awareness that can observe all of these phenomena without being defined by them. The stable center that remains unchanged regardless of the emotional storms swirling around you. This is where the mirror becomes truly clear. Not when others see you accurately, but when you see yourself independently of their vision, clearly and compassionately, with the steady recognition that your worth was never theirs to determine. Hate lives in stories. It feeds on narratives about the past, projections into the future, elaborate interpretations of what someone meant by their silence, what they implied with their glance, what they intended with their distance. Hate requires memory to nurse old wounds and imagination to create new fears. But peace lives in this breath, in this moment, in the simple reality of what is actually happening right now. When someone's behavior toward you becomes a source of confusion and pain, your mind naturally begins to construct stories. You replay past conversations, searching for clues. You imagine future scenarios where you might confront them or win them back. You build elaborate theories about their motivations, their hidden resentments, their secret judgments. These stories become more real to you than the present moment, more vivid than what is actually occurring right now. But stories, however compelling, are not reality. They are interpretations, constructions, mental movies that may have little connection to what is actually true. When you live in these stories, you are not living in the present. You are living in a fictional narrative that exists only in your mind, a narrative that often causes more suffering than the original event that triggered it. The ancient Stoics understood this tendency of the mind to create suffering through storytelling. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself to stay with what was actually happening rather than his interpretations of what was happening. Confine yourself to the present, he wrote, because the present is the only place where clarity and peace are possible. Consider the difference between these two experiences. Someone you care about walks past you without acknowledging your presence. The story mind immediately begins its work. They're angry with me. They must have heard something. They're deliberately ignoring me. This means they hate me now. I've lost them forever. Each thought builds on the previous one, creating an elaborate narrative of rejection and loss. But what actually happened? Someone walked past without acknowledging your presence. That is the only fact. Everything else, the anger, the deliberate ignoring, the hatred, the loss, exists only in the story you created about that fact. The present moment contains simply what occurred. Your mind has added all the meaning, all the drama, all the suffering. Returning to the present means learning to distinguish between what happened and what you think it means. It means catching your mind in the act of storytelling and gently bringing your attention back to what is actually occurring right now. This is not denial or spiritual bypassing. It is clarity, the ability to see what is without the distortion of interpretation. The practice begins with your breath. When you notice your mind spinning stories about someone's behavior toward you, you can anchor yourself in the simple reality of breathing. The breath is always present, always available, always true. It exists outside of narratives, beyond interpretation, in the pure realm of what is actually happening. As you breathe, you can ask yourself, what am I actually experiencing right now, apart from my thoughts about what happened? You might notice tension in your shoulders, a knot in your stomach, a tightness in your chest. These physical sensations are present moment realities, information about your current state, rather than evidence for the stories your mind is creating. Sarah discovered this practice when her friend Emma began treating her coldly. Initially, Sarah spent hours analyzing their last conversation, imagining Emma's inner thoughts, creating elaborate scenarios about what she might have done wrong. But gradually, she learned to notice when her mind was spinning these stories and return to the present moment. She would feel her feet on the ground, notice the air on her skin, listen to the sounds around her. In the present moment, she was safe, whole, and free from the suffering her stories created. The present moment has a different quality than the story mind. It is spacious rather than cramped, peaceful rather than agitated, clear rather than confused. In the present, you are not the victim of someone's rejection. You are simply a person breathing, existing, experiencing life as it unfolds moment by moment. Returning to the present also means releasing your attachment to understanding why someone's behavior changed. The story mind desperately wants explanations, reasons, closure. It believes that if it can just figure out what happened, it can control what happens next. But the present moment requires no explanations. It simply is what it is, complete in itself, requiring no narrative to make it meaningful. This does not mean becoming passive or naive about others' behavior. Present moment awareness actually enhances your ability to perceive clearly because you are not looking through the filter of stories, expectations, or interpretations. You can see others' actions more accurately when you are not busy trying to fit those actions into predetermined narratives. The Zen tradition speaks of beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh eyes as if encountering it for the first time. When someone treats you differently, you can practice beginner's mind by releasing your stories about what their behavior means and simply observing what is actually happening. This creates space for new possibilities, new understanding, new responses. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it." When you return to the present moment, you stop letting your thoughts about someone's behavior create your experience of life. You reclaim your freedom to respond to what is actually happening rather than reacting to the stories you have created about what is happening. The present moment is also the only place where genuine compassion is possible. When you are caught in stories about someone's rejection of you, you can only see them through the lens of your own hurt. But in the present moment, you can perceive them more clearly, as a human being who may be struggling, who may be in pain, who may be acting from their own wounds, rather than from any accurate assessment of your worth. This shift from story to presence is not a one-time achievement, but a continuous practice. The mind will always generate stories. That is its nature. But you can learn to recognize when you are living in a story rather than in reality, and you can choose to return to the present moment again and again. The practice becomes particularly powerful when you apply it to your emotional reactions. Instead of thinking, "I feel terrible because they hate me," you can simply notice, "I am experiencing sadness right now. I am feeling fear in this moment. I am sensing anxiety in my body." This allows you to be present with your emotions without being overwhelmed by the stories that often accompany them. In the present moment, you are not defined by others' opinions of you because those opinions exist in their minds, not in your immediate reality. You are not diminished by their rejection because that rejection is their internal experience, not your current truth. You are not wounded by their silence because that silence is simply an absence of sound, not a judgment about your worth. Hate lives in stories, stories about the past, stories about the future, stories about what things mean. But peace lives in this breath, in this moment, in the simple truth of what is actually here right now. When you return to the present, you return to the only place where peace is possible, the only time where freedom is real, the only moment where you have the power to choose how to respond to life as it actually is. There is a profound difference between protecting yourself and punishing yourself, between setting boundaries and building barriers, between becoming resilient and becoming numb. The Stoic philosophers understood that true strength lies not in hardening your heart against the world, but in developing what they called aperture, a state of emotional equilibrium that can withstand external turbulence without losing its essential warmth and humanity. When someone treats you with inexplicable coldness or hostility, your first instinct might be to protect yourself by closing down, by deciding never to be vulnerable again, by building walls so high that no one can hurt you. This response is understandable, but it comes at a tremendous cost. In protecting yourself from their cruelty, you also shut yourself off from love, from connection, from the very experiences that make life meaningful. The ancient Stoics faced this same challenge. They lived in a world full of political intrigue, betrayal, and violence, yet they sought to maintain their capacity for wisdom, justice, courage, and love. They developed practices that allowed them to remain open to life while being protected from its inevitable disappointments and cruelties. True protection begins with understanding what actually needs to be protected. Your worth does not need protection because it cannot be damaged by others' opinions. Your essential self does not need guarding because it exists beyond the reach of external judgment. What needs protection is your peace, your energy, your capacity to respond rather than react, your ability to choose your own emotional state, regardless of how others choose to treat you. Consider the metaphor of a house with strong walls and wide-open windows. The walls protect the interior from storms, intruders, and unwanted elements, but the windows allow light, fresh air, and beauty to enter freely. When you build inner walls without hardening, you create this same dynamic: protection without isolation, safety without numbness, boundaries without barriers. The first principle of this protective architecture is emotional sovereignty. The recognition that your emotional state is your responsibility, not others' responsibility, and therefore not at their mercy. When someone treats you poorly, you can choose to feel hurt without letting that hurt define your worth. You can acknowledge disappointment without letting disappointment become despair. You can experience anger without letting anger become hatred. Maria learned this distinction when her longtime friend Jennifer began treating her with increasing hostility. Initially, Maria's response was to match Jennifer's energy, becoming defensive when Jennifer was critical, withdrawing when Jennifer was cold, building walls that kept Jennifer out, but also kept warmth from entering. Gradually, Maria realized that this approach was turning her into someone she didn't want to be, guarded, suspicious, and bitter. Instead, Maria began practicing what she called loving boundaries. She continued to treat Jennifer with kindness while protecting herself from absorbing Jennifer's negativity. She would listen to Jennifer's complaints without taking them personally, offer support without expecting gratitude, and maintain her own peace without trying to change Jennifer's mood. The walls she built were around her peace, not around her heart. This type of protection requires what psychologists call emotional differentiation, the ability to remain yourself in the presence of others' emotional dysfunction. You can witness their pain without absorbing it, acknowledge their hostility without internalizing it, recognize their projection without accepting it as truth about yourself. The Stoic Emperor Marcus Aurelius practiced this in the most challenging circumstances, surrounded by people who often sought to manipulate, flatter, or deceive him. He wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." When someone treats you poorly, the temptation is to respond in kind, to protect yourself by becoming like them. But this approach destroys what you are trying to protect: your own character, your own peace, your own capacity for love. Building inner walls without hardening also means learning to distinguish between self-protection and self-punishment. Self-protection keeps you safe while maintaining your capacity for joy and connection. Self-punishment closes you off from life itself, making you safe from others' cruelty, but also safe from their love, their warmth, their potential for goodness. The difference lies in your intention. Are you protecting your ability to love, or are you punishing yourself for having loved? Are you safeguarding your peace, or are you numbing yourself to avoid feeling anything at all? Are you creating healthy boundaries, or are you building a prison that keeps others out but also keeps you trapped inside? True Stoic resilience maintains what they called philanthropia, love for humanity despite humanity's flaws. This love is not naive or sentimental. It is based on the recognition that humans are imperfect beings who often act from pain, fear, and confusion rather than wisdom and clarity. When you understand this, you can protect yourself from their unconscious cruelty without closing your heart to their potential for goodness. The practice involves what Epictetus called the discipline of desire, wanting only what is within your control and accepting what is not. You cannot control others' behavior toward you, but you can control your response to their behavior. You cannot force them to treat you well, but you can choose to treat yourself well, regardless of how they treat you. This creates a form of protection that is both strong and flexible, like bamboo that bends in the storm without breaking. You become resilient, not by becoming rigid, but by becoming responsive. You protect yourself not by shutting down, but by staying grounded in your own center while others storm around you. The inner walls you build should be permeable to love, but impermeable to abuse, open to authentic connection, but closed to manipulation, receptive to genuine feedback, but resistant to projection. These walls are not built from anger or bitterness, but from self-respect and wisdom, not from fear of others, but from love for yourself. Sometimes building these walls means having difficult conversations, setting clear boundaries about what behavior you will and will not accept. Sometimes it means simply choosing not to absorb others' emotional chaos, like an umbrella that keeps you dry without stopping the rain. Sometimes it means loving someone from a distance, maintaining your care for them while protecting yourself from their dysfunction. The goal is not to become invulnerable, that would make you inhuman. The goal is to become what the Stoics called apathetic in the original sense, not without feeling, but without being overwhelmed by feeling, able to experience emotions fully while not being controlled by them, capable of love without being dependent on being loved in return. When you build inner walls without hardening, you create what Marcus Aurelius called the inner citadel, a fortress of peace that exists within you, protected from external storms but open to internal light. Others may rage outside your walls, but inside you remain yourself, loving, wise, free, and unshaken by their inability to appreciate what they are attacking. You can be kind without being naive, strong without being cruel, protected without being closed. This is the architecture of true resilience. Walls that guard your peace, while keeping your heart open to the possibility that even those who hurt you are ultimately fellow travelers struggling to find their way home to love. The most radical act of freedom is to love without requiring love in return, to offer kindness without demanding gratitude, to extend compassion without expecting reciprocation. This is what the Stoics called philanthropia, love for humanity that exists independently of humanity's response to that love. It is love as a practice of virtue rather than a strategy for getting needs met. Love as an expression of your character rather than an investment in a particular outcome. When someone treats you with inexplicable coldness or hostility, your natural impulse may be to withdraw your care, to match their energy, to protect yourself by becoming like them. But this approach makes your capacity to love dependent on their capacity to receive it, your ability to be kind contingent on their willingness to appreciate kindness. It transforms love from a practice into a transaction, from a virtue into a vulnerability. The ancient Stoics understood that making your virtue dependent on others' responses was a form of slavery. It meant that your ability to be the person you want to be was controlled by people who might be incapable of recognizing goodness when they encountered it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best way to avenge yourself is to not be like your enemy." When someone cannot love you back, the most powerful response is to continue loving anyway, not for their sake, but for your own. This does not mean becoming a doormat or accepting abuse in the name of unconditional love. It means maintaining your essential nature regardless of how others choose to respond to it. It means continuing to act from your highest values even when others act from their lowest impulses. It means refusing to let their inability to love determine your ability to love. Consider the story of David, whose brother Mark had gradually become hostile and distant over several years. Mark would make cutting remarks during family gatherings, ignore David's attempts at conversation, and generally treat him with barely concealed contempt. David's first impulse was to respond in kind, to protect himself by becoming equally cold and distant. But David gradually realized that this response was allowing Mark's dysfunction to control David's own behavior. Instead of matching Mark's hostility, David chose to continue treating Mark with respect and kindness, not because Mark deserved it or appreciated it, but because treating others with respect and kindness was who David wanted to be. David's love for his brother became independent of his brother's capacity to receive or return that love. The existentialist philosophers understood this as a form of radical authenticity, choosing to be who you are regardless of how others respond to who you are. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote that we are condemned to be free, meaning that we have no choice but to choose who to be in each moment. When someone cannot love you back, you still have the freedom to choose love, kindness, and compassion as expressions of your authentic self. This type of love requires what the Stoics called detached attachment, caring deeply while holding outcomes lightly. You can love someone fully while accepting that they may never love you back. You can offer your best self while accepting that they may reject what you offer. You can maintain your commitment to virtue while releasing your need for recognition, appreciation, or reciprocation. The practice begins with understanding the difference between conditional and unconditional expressions of your character. Conditional love says, "I will be kind to you if you are kind to me." Unconditional love says, "I will be kind to you because kindness is who I choose to be." Conditional compassion depends on the other person's worthiness. Unconditional compassion flows from your own commitment to compassion as a way of being. This distinction becomes particularly important when dealing with people who seem determined to push away your love, who interpret your kindness as weakness, who mistake your compassion for naivety. These people often test your commitment to love by making love as difficult as possible to offer. They are unconsciously asking, "Will you still care about me even when I make caring about me painful?" Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone who cannot love you back is to continue loving them from a distance. This means maintaining your good wishes for their well-being while protecting yourself from their inability to appreciate or reciprocate your care. It means holding space for their potential while accepting their current limitations. The Buddhist concept of loving kindness offers a framework for this practice. Loving kindness begins with the recognition that all beings want to be happy and free from suffering, even those who seem to create suffering for themselves and others. When someone treats you poorly, you can practice loving kindness by wishing them well while protecting yourself from their dysfunction. This might sound like, "May you find peace even though you cannot offer peace to me. May you find healing even though your wounds are affecting our relationship. May you find love even though you cannot love me back right now." This practice maintains your heart's openness while acknowledging the reality of their current limitations. Love without expecting love back also transforms your relationship to rejection. When someone cannot receive your love, their rejection becomes information about their capacity rather than evidence of your inadequacy. Their inability to appreciate your kindness reveals their current state, not your worth. Their rejection of your care says more about their wounds than your offerings. Marcus Aurelius practiced this understanding in his role as emperor, constantly dealing with people who sought to manipulate or deceive him. He wrote, "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it." When someone could not return his care, he chose to see this as their limitation rather than his failure, their loss rather than his inadequacy. The freedom in this approach is profound. When your love is not dependent on being loved back, you are free to love purely, without agenda, without keeping score, without the anxiety that comes from needing particular responses from particular people. Your love becomes an expression of your abundance rather than evidence of your need. This does not mean loving without discernment or wisdom. You can love someone's essential being while recognizing that their current behavior is harmful. You can wish them well while choosing not to expose yourself to their hostility. You can maintain compassion for their struggle while protecting your own peace. The practice also extends to how you interpret others' inability to love you back. Instead of seeing their coldness as evidence of your unlovability, you can see it as evidence of their pain. Instead of taking their rejection personally, you can recognize it as their defense against vulnerability. Instead of feeling hurt by their hostility, you can feel compassion for the wounds that make hostility feel necessary to them. When you love without expecting love back, you discover that love is not diminished by being unreciprocated, it is purified. Your capacity to care becomes stronger, not weaker, when it no longer depends on external validation. Your heart becomes more resilient, not more vulnerable, when it learns to give without keeping accounts. This is the ultimate freedom, to be loving because love is your nature, not because love is rewarded. To be kind because kindness reflects your character, not because kindness guarantees kind treatment in return. To be compassionate because compassion is who you choose to be, regardless of whether that choice is understood, appreciated, or reciprocated. They may not love you back, but that does not diminish your capacity to love. Their inability to receive your care does not reduce the value of offering it. Their rejection of your kindness does not make kindness any less beautiful or necessary in the world. Love without expecting love back, and discover that love, when freed from the need for reciprocation, becomes not a vulnerability but a superpower, the ability to remain yourself, no matter how others choose to be. True indifference is not coldness, it is clarity. It is not the absence of caring, but the presence of wisdom that knows what deserves your care and what does not. When the Stoics spoke of indifference, they did not mean becoming emotionally numb or disconnected from life. They meant developing the ability to remain unshaken by things that cannot truly harm you while remaining fully engaged with what actually matters. Others' opinions of you cannot change your essential worth. Their hostility cannot diminish your character. Their rejection cannot reduce your value. Their inability to appreciate your presence cannot make you less worthy of appreciation. Understanding this truth deeply, not just intellectually, but in your bones, is the foundation of genuine indifference and genuine power. The word indifference has been corrupted in common usage to mean apathy or emotional numbness, but the original Stoic concept of adiaphora, things that are indifferent, referred to external circumstances that, while they might be preferred or dispreferred, could not actually harm your essential well-being. Others' treatment of you falls into this category. It may be pleasant when they treat you well and unpleasant when they treat you poorly, but it cannot actually damage who you are. This understanding creates what might be called psychological unhooking, the ability to observe others' behavior toward you without being controlled by it, to witness their emotional states without absorbing them, to encounter their projections without internalizing them. You become like a mountain that remains unchanged, whether storms rage around it or sunshine warms it. The weather is noticed, but does not alter the mountain's essential nature. Consider Elena, who discovered that several colleagues had been spreading negative rumors about her work. Initially, she felt devastated, angry, and desperate to defend herself. She spent weeks crafting responses, gathering evidence, and trying to change their minds. But gradually, she realized that their opinions had no power over her actual competence, her actual worth, or her actual future, unless she gave them that power. Eleanor began practicing what she called strategic indifference. She continued to do excellent work, not to prove them wrong, but because excellent work was her standard. She treated her colleagues professionally, not to win them over, but because professionalism reflected her character. She stopped monitoring their opinions of her because their opinions were irrelevant to her actual performance and progress. This shift from reactive engagement to strategic indifference gave Eleanor back her power. She was no longer dancing to the rhythm of their judgments, no longer adjusting her behavior based on their moods, no longer making their approval the measure of her success. She had reclaimed her agency by recognizing that their opinions belonged to them, not to her. The power of indifference lies in its ability to neutralize others' attempts to control you through their reactions. When someone treats you poorly in hopes of getting a particular response, your indifference to their treatment removes their ability to manipulate your behavior. When someone withdraws their approval to punish you, your indifference to their approval removes the sting from their punishment. This is not the same as not caring about anyone or anything. True Stoic indifference is highly selective. It applies specifically to things that are genuinely outside your control and cannot actually harm your essential well-being. You remain deeply engaged with your own growth, your own choices, your own character development. You simply stop being controlled by others' responses to those choices. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. The strength he speaks of comes from recognizing that others' behavior toward you is an outside event, something happening in their consciousness, not a determining factor in your inner experience unless you choose to make it so. Indifference also creates space for authentic compassion. When you are not hooked by others' treatment of you, you can see their behavior more clearly. Their hostility becomes information about their internal state rather than evidence of your inadequacy. Their coldness reveals their capacity for warmth rather than your worthiness of warmth. Their rejection illuminates their ability to connect rather than your lovability. This clarity allows you to respond rather than react. Instead of defending yourself against their projections, you can simply decline to accept delivery of emotions that don't belong to you. Instead of trying to change their minds about you, you can focus on being the person you want to be, regardless of their perceptions. Instead of being diminished by their inability to appreciate you, you can remain grounded in your own recognition of your worth. The practice of indifference requires distinguishing between what is truly yours and what belongs to others. Their anger is theirs, not yours to carry. Their disappointment is theirs, not yours to fix. Their inability to understand you is theirs, not yours to remedy through endless explanation. Your responsibility is to be authentic, kind, and true to your values. Their responsibility is to respond to that authenticity in whatever way they choose. This understanding creates what psychologists call emotional boundaries, the ability to remain yourself in the presence of others' dysfunction. You can witness their struggle without absorbing it, acknowledge their pain without making it yours, recognize their hostility without internalizing it as truth about yourself. Sometimes people interpret indifference as coldness or lack of caring, but true indifference often allows for more genuine warmth because it is not contaminated by neediness, not distorted by the desire for particular responses, not compromised by the fear of rejection. When you are not desperate for their approval, you can offer authentic care. When you are not afraid of their disapproval, you can be genuinely yourself. The power of indifference also extends to positive treatment from others. Just as their criticism cannot diminish you, their praise cannot inflate you. Just as their rejection cannot reduce your worth, their acceptance cannot increase it. Your value exists independently of their recognition of it. your worthiness independent of their acknowledgement of it. This creates a profound stability. You are no longer riding the emotional roller coaster of others' moods, no longer dependent on their approval for your sense of well-being, no longer threatened by their disapproval. You become what the Stoics called autarkic, self-sufficient in your ability to maintain inner peace regardless of external circumstances. Indifference is not a wall built to keep others out. It is a foundation built to keep you steady. It is not a rejection of human connection, but a requirement for healthy connection. When you are not desperately seeking others' approval, you can form relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than mutual neediness. When you are not afraid of others' rejection, you can be authentic rather than performative. The ultimate power of indifference is that it returns you to yourself. You stop being a victim of others' emotions and become the author of your own inner experience. You stop being controlled by their opinions and start being guided by your own values. You stop being diminished by their inability to appreciate you and start being empowered by your ability to appreciate yourself. They may approve or disapprove, love or hate, accept or reject, and you remain unchanged, unshaken, undisturbed by their inability to see clearly who you actually are. This is not coldness. This is clarity. This is not disconnection. This is freedom. In the deepest part of your being lies something that cannot be touched by others' opinions, cannot be diminished by their rejection, cannot be disturbed by their hostility. The Stoics called this your hegemonikon, your ruling faculty, your essential self, your unmoved center. It is the part of you that observes all experience without being changed by it, the awareness that witnesses all emotions without being controlled by them, the presence that remains constant through all the changes in your external circumstances. When someone suddenly turns cold toward you, when their warmth transforms into indifference or their friendship into hostility, this unmoved center remains exactly what it has always been. Others' ability to appreciate you may change, but your essential nature does not. Their capacity to understand you may fluctuate, but your inherent worth remains constant. Their willingness to offer you warmth may vary, but your inner light continues to shine with the same steady radiance. This unmoved center is not something you create or achieve. It is something you discover, something you return to, something you remember you have always been. It exists prior to others' opinions about you, independent of their ability to recognize it, unaffected by their choice to acknowledge it or ignore it. Finding this center is not about building new strength, but about recognizing the strength you have always possessed. Marcus Aurelius, who governed an empire while facing constant political intrigue, betrayal, and criticism, practiced returning to this center daily. He wrote, "Retreat into yourself." The rational principle which rules has this nature, that it is content with itself when it does that which is just, and so secures tranquility. He understood that no matter what chaos surrounded him, no matter how others chose to treat him, he could always return to the still point within himself where peace was constant and unshakable. The unmoved center is like the eye of a hurricane, a place of perfect stillness that exists within the storm but is not touched by it. Others may rage around you, project their wounds onto you, withdraw their love from you, but in your center you remain undisturbed, not because you don't care, but because you understand that their storm is theirs, not yours. Their weather belongs to them, not to you. This understanding transforms how you experience others' coldness toward you. Instead of being swept away by their emotional weather, you become a witness to it. Instead of absorbing their hostility as truth about yourself, you observe it as information about their internal state. Instead of being diminished by their inability to appreciate you, you remain grounded in your own intrinsic worth. Sarah discovered this center during a period when several longtime friends began treating her with inexplicable coldness. Initially, she felt devastated, questioning everything about herself, trying desperately to understand what she had done wrong. But gradually, through meditation and philosophical study, she found a place within herself that remained untouched by their rejection, a quiet space where she knew her own worth independent of their recognition of it. From this center, Sarah could see her friends' behavior more clearly. She recognized their coldness as evidence of their own struggles rather than evidence of her inadequacy. She understood their rejection as information about their capacity for connection rather than proof of her unlovability. This shift in perspective didn't eliminate her sadness about the loss of these friendships, but it prevented that sadness from defining her sense of self. The unmoved center is not emotionally numb or disconnected from feeling. It feels everything but is identified with nothing. It experiences sadness when relationships end but is not destroyed by that sadness. It notices disappointment when others fail to understand but is not defined by that disappointment. It acknowledges hurt when others are cruel but is not diminished by that hurt. This center knows something that the reactive mind often forgets. You are not your experiences. You are not your emotions. You are not others' opinions of you. You are the awareness that can observe all of these phenomena with clarity and compassion. You are the consciousness that remains constant while everything else changes. You are the still point that exists beyond the reach of others' ability to disturb. Finding this center requires practice, especially when others' treatment of you triggers your deepest insecurities. The mind naturally wants to engage with their hostility, to defend against their projections, to fix their misunderstandings. But each time you choose to return to your center instead of engaging with their chaos, you strengthen your ability to remain unmoved by external turbulence. The Stoic emperor Marcus Aurelius faced this challenge constantly. People sought to flatter him, manipulate him, deceive him, and use him for their own purposes. He wrote, "The best way to avenge yourself is to not be like your enemy." Instead of being changed by others' dysfunction, he chose to remain centered in his own values, his own wisdom, his own commitment to virtue. This practice becomes particularly powerful when applied to people whose opinion once mattered deeply to you. When someone whose love you valued begins treating you with coldness, the temptation is to chase after their approval, to change yourself to win back their warmth, to let their withdrawal determine your sense of worth. But from your unmoved center, you can recognize that their inability to appreciate you reveals their current limitations, not your actual value. The unmoved center also transforms how you respond to others' projections. Instead of absorbing their anger as evidence that you are bad, you can observe their anger as information about their internal state. Instead of internalizing their criticism as truth about your character, you can recognize their criticism as their attempt to manage their own discomfort. Instead of being diminished by their rejection, you can remain grounded in your own wholeness. This is not spiritual bypassing or emotional suppression. You can feel hurt when others are cruel while remaining centered in your essential worth. You can experience disappointment when relationships fail while staying grounded in your intrinsic value. You can acknowledge sadness when others withdraw their love while remaining connected to your own capacity to love. The existentialist philosophers understood this as radical authenticity, choosing to be who you are regardless of how others respond to who you are. When you are anchored in your unmoved center, you can be authentic without being controlled by others' reactions to your authenticity. You can be vulnerable without being destroyed by others' inability to honor that vulnerability. You can be open without being diminished by others' choice to close themselves off from you. From this center, you develop what the Stoics called sympathia, a recognition of your connection to all of humanity while maintaining your individual sovereignty. You can care about others' well-being without being responsible for their choices. You can feel compassion for their struggles without absorbing their dysfunction. You can love them without being controlled by their ability or inability to love you back. The unmoved center is not a place you go to escape life. It is the place from which you engage life most fully. It is not a retreat from relationship, but the foundation that makes healthy relationship possible. When you are not desperate for others' approval, you can form connections based on genuine compatibility. When you are not afraid of others' rejection, you can be authentic rather than performative. In the end, the unmoved center reveals a profound truth. You are already whole, already complete, already worthy of love. Not because others recognize these things about you, but because these things are your fundamental nature. Others may see clearly, or they may be blinded by their own pain. They may appreciate your presence, or they may take it for granted. They may treat you with kindness, or they may treat you with cruelty. But in your center, you remain, unshaken by their inability to see you clearly, unseen by their shadows, alive in your own quiet light. This is not coldness masquerading as wisdom. This is wisdom expressing itself as unshakable peace, immovable compassion, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are, regardless of who others think you are. They may hate, they may turn, they may fall silent, but you remain centered, sovereign, free, and touched by a peace that exists beyond the reach of their storms, illuminated by a light that shines independently of their ability to see it, grounded in a love that flows from your own depths rather than depending on their capacity to return it. They may hate, they may turn, they may fall silent, but you remain unshaken, unseen by their shadows, alive in your own quiet light. Through returning to the present, building inner walls without hardening, loving without expectation, practicing true indifference, and finding your unmoved center, you have constructed what the Stoics called the inner citadel, a fortress of peace that stands untouchable by others' emotional weather. You are no longer at the mercy of their moods, no longer defined by their opinions, no longer diminished by their inability to appreciate what stands before them. You have remembered who you are beneath all their projections, beyond all their expectations, independent of all their capacity or incapacity to love. This is the quiet fortress, not built from hardness, but from wisdom, not from coldness, but from clarity, not from indifference, but from the recognition of what truly matters and what does not. Here, in this space of unshakable peace, you are finally free to be yourself, regardless of how others choose to be.